Welcome back to the news at 10. The federal government is set to conduct a technical needs assessment to ameliorate the impact of climate change in the country. Now, this was the thrust of the message by the Minister of Science and Technology, Dr. Ogbonnaya, while addressing a gathering on climate change in Abuja. He explained that the ministry is working with the Ministry of Environment to deploy the relevant science and technology initiatives that will address Nigeria's climate change challenges.
Desertification, flood and rising sea level. Environmental degradation is one of the adverse effects of climate change in Nigeria. The resultant effect is taking a toll on the socio-economic life of the nation. Officials from the Ministries of Environment, Science and Technology and development partners have come together to discuss the technical needs assessment of climate change in Nigeria.
The worsening impact of climate change could create a looming human crisis and threaten the development process of any nation. Nigeria is one of the countries that could be adversely affected by the worsening impacts of climate change. This may further worsen the hardest farmers' clashes if urgent steps are not taken to curb the trend.
Nigeria post-harvest losses top $9 billion each and every year, translating not only to food loss, but also income, also job opportunities. And if you're talking of climate change, which is already the elephant in the room, with projections year after year showing that economies in the African continent will be shrink by 75%. And right here in Nigeria, climate change is projected to cause between 6 to 30% of the gross domestic product, translating to over 460 billion losses. That then tells us that we have to do things differently.
With this workshop, Nigeria is joining several nations that have developed science and technology solutions to arrest the impact of climate change in their communities.
Climate change is not something that we should be afraid of. We must confront it. We must utilize our knowledge. We must use science, technology, and innovation to ameliorate it and even convert it into creating opportunities for both economic and social development.
The minister set up a national steering committee to oversee the governance structure for the technical needs assessment process to mitigate climate change.
The plight of exporters of agro-produce in the country appears to be worsening as the Apapa gridlock persists. Well, that has persisted in spite of the impressive contribution to the non-oil sector to the country's GDP, as contained in the second quarter report by the National Bureau of Statistics. Our correspondent Chris Elems reports.
Cocoa, cashew, sesame seeds are major cash crops in Nigeria and have become significant revenue earners for farmers and exporters. Annual production of cocoa, for example, is put at an average of 230,000 tons, much of which is exported for foreign exchange. In spite of the comparative advantage the country has enjoyed over the years from buyers, the current state of port operations in the country appears to be casting a dark shadow over transactions.
Most of these containers heading towards Apapa are either empty or filled with exportable items which are perishable. It usually will take them 21 days from the warehouse to destination. But right now, for some of them, they've spent over 28 days just waiting to get to the port, and the goods are wasting away.
A recent report indicates that in the Apapa gridlock, there are about 30,000 tons of cocoa stranded, with a value in excess of 2.1 billion naira. While the exporters continue to fear the worst is yet to happen, the drivers have turned the hard pavement to their beds and the streets their homes.
I have no opportunity to reach out. For my wife own, me and her don't see, we never see more than 5 or 6 months ago.
While the federal government continues to accord itself some points on the ease of doing business in the country, It appears these businessmen do not think so.
Like I have one of my clients that actually having volumes of containers, like 200 containers a month, purely on LC jobs that supposed not to cost them so much things. But what we're seeing today is that each time we take the containers to them, it's very difficult to take the containers back.
You have to look at the electricity. You have to look at the waterways. You have to look at the ability to get loan at a single unit. And you are talking about ease of doing business. What is ease of doing business? Is it registration? If it's ability to register a company, that one is the government has not added any value to that.
In the face of this lingering monstrous event that has plagued business activities in the country, what's the government up to?
Recently, we have discussed with the Ministry of Works. We have submitted to them all the roads that link port locations to the hinterland to enable them prioritize reconstruction of those roads. Recently, I saw an award for the Ecom Bridge, which is very encouraging because that bridge is critical to evacuation of cargo from Calabar to the north.
Our ability and capacity to deal with this lingering siege will invariably give coloration to how much of foreign and local investors' confidence we can sustain. Chris Elems, Channels Television News.
Let's take a look at some business news now. Here's Kayode Okikiolu.
You First. First Bank.
Thank you, Jema. You're welcome to Business News. The Standards Organization of Nigeria's Governing Council has reeled out some 339 standards for products and services in line with global trends and international best practices. The standards, which cut across various sectors of the economy, aims to curtail the rejection of Nigerian produces in the global front.
The building and civil construction, we have 37 standards. In the chemical technology sector, we have 91 standards. In the electrical and electronics, we have 23 standards. In the food and agricultural sector, we have 38 standards. In the mechanical engineering sector, we have 132 standards. In the textile leather, we have 2 standards. And in the service standards, we have 16. Of these lots, the reviewed standards, like you have earlier been told, is 31. The newly elaborated 85, and the adopted standards that were adopted from international standards are 223 standards. In total, we have 339 standards recently approved by the Standards Organization of Nigeria Governing Council. Highlights of the newly approved Nigerian industrial standards include those on anti-bribery management systems and good governance, African traditional medicine, human resource management, tourism and hotel management, as well as agricultural produce.
And MTN Nigeria says it has asked a federal high court in Lagos to restrain the Central Bank of Nigeria and the Attorney General of the Federation from taking further actions for the refund of $10.134 billion. The embattled telecoms giant says the move aims to protect its assets and shareholders' rights within the confines of Nigerian law as it continues to dialogue with the relevant authorities. About 2 weeks ago, the CBN announced it wrote MTN to refund about $8.13 billion illegally transferred out of Nigeria, while the AGF, on the other hand, recently accused the firm of not paying taxes on foreign imports of about $2 billion to the federal government. MTN Nigeria has denied the allegations and claims. And elsewhere, it's still downbeat performance for Nigeria's stock market as massive price losses from major blue chip stocks, particularly food and beverage giant Nestle, sent the all-share index spiraling to a new low. Chimezie Obiwago tells us more.
Thank you and welcome to the Stock Market Report. The bears maintained their grip on the equities markets this first trading day of a new week. The market bled throughout the trading session with the all-share index down by 1.25% at the sound of the closing gong. 4 out of the 5 major sectors were down, while the industrial goods sector closed unchanged. Sell pressure was more on the consumer goods, which saw the sector down by almost 4%, with Nestle heavily hit, losing 9.67% of its share price. The volume and value of shares traded today was very low, quite unusual of a Monday. In 3,100 deals, a total of 137.6 million shares were traded for just a meager 1 billion naira. Activities were majorly driven by banking stocks, Diamond Bank, UBA and GT Bank to be precise. For traders, this negative sentiment is too much in a day to be sustained. They therefore expect a slight turnaround on Tuesday. And that was the stock market report. I'm Chimezi Obi Iwago.
Thank you, Chimezi. On a global scale, it's a fairly mixed close for major global equities market on Monday amidst a rebound in tech stocks on Wall Street as investors try to shake off concerns over global trade tensions. Let's take a look at the figures. And that's business news for tonight. Thank you for watching. I am Kayode Okikiolu. The news at 10 continues with Ijeoma.
You First. First Bank.
Thanks a lot, Kayode. A memorial to celebrate the life and legacy of the former United Nations Secretary General Kofi Annan has been held in Abuja, Nigeria's capital. The event was organized by the United Nations Mission in Nigeria in collaboration with the Nigerian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the High Commission of Ghana in Nigeria. Tributes poured in from the various missions and diplomats in Nigeria, including a former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Professor Bolaji Akinyemi.
Diplomats and invited guests signing the condolence register of the late United Nations Secretary General, Mr. Kofi Annan, at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Inside the hall, the mood depicts that of a memorial, which it is. A minute's silence is observed. The Minister of Foreign Affairs is the first to speak on the contributions of the late Nobel laureate to global peace and development.
We have much to celebrate in him, and I'm confident that his legacy of selfless service and commitment to human dignity and global peace will not be forgotten by the international community.
One after the other, they eulogized the late icon of peace who died on the 18th of August 2018.
Kofi Annan viewed the HIV/AIDS pandemic as his personal priority, proposing the establishment of the Global AIDS and Health Fund to help developing countries deal with the crisis.
Just the mortal remains of a man whose time on earth touched our hearts to care for one another, to love rather than to hate, to show fairness in the dispensation of justice.
The keynote address is delivered by a former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Professor Bolaji Akinyemi.
He was opposed to the second invasion of Iraq, and extrapolating on that, we can surmise that he would have been opposed to the invasion of Libya and the exploitation of the Arab Spring to secure regime change in several Arab countries.
The late Kofi Annan will be remembered for his worthy contribution to world peace and perhaps his numerous quotes, one of which is, "We need to keep hope alive and strive to do better." Terry Ikumi, Channels Television News.
Rest in peace, Kofi Annan. And still ahead on the news at 10, Nigeria's Super Eagles set to honor former World Footballer of the Year and Liberia's President George Weah with a friendly against the Lone Stars. That's on sports. Please stay with us.